forest canopy had thinned hours ago, trading the deep green shadow of home for a more open stretch of path, framed by low ferns and tall meadow grass. The late afternoon light came golden through the leaves, touching the path ahead with shifting warmth. Esper padded ahead, steady and silent, her twin-tipped tail curling in that idle, petal-like way it did when her thoughts wandered. Daffodil followed just behind, his paws brushing the grass, occasionally plucking at a wayward stem with his teeth as if to check its scent. The road was quiet save for the chirr of bug-type Pokemon and the distant rush of a creek they'd passed earlier. Aspen's directions still echoed in Esper's mind. North to the town. Rest there. Listen for the places you seek. She didn't know exactly what they'd find, but the thought of information about the fog-shrouded basin or the Fairylight Plains felt like the first true step toward her goal. Daffodil's voice broke the calm. "So, your siblings," he began, hesitating like he was stepping into a pond he wasn't sure about. "How much do you actually know about them? I mean, you've never met, right?" Esper glanced back at him, green eyes catching the warm light. "I know their names. Storm and Starlight." Her tone was even, but her pace slowed a little. "And I know where they were when they hatched. I was told about their homes. One in a place called the Fog-Shrouded Basin, the other in the Fairylight Plains." "That's not much," Daffodil said gently. He pulled at the rose tuft near his ear, releasing a faint petal that drifted down between them. "So, no idea what they're like?" Esper's gaze went forward again, scanning the distant break in the trees where the horizon looked paler. "No, but I've imagined since I was small." He tilted his head. "Imagined?" "I used to wonder," she said, her voice quieter now, "if they were safe, if they had someone like Aspen and Willow, if they laughed the same way I do, or if they hated the same weather." She flicked her ear at the sound of a passing Pidgey. "I don't know if they'd even recognize me if we stood in the same room." Daffodil walked alongside her now, his steps matching hers. "Well," he said, trying for a smile, "if they don't, I'll make sure they know you're worth knowing." That earned the faintest hum from her, almost a laugh, and the crystal gems in her chest shimmered once in the fading sun. "I'll hold you to that." They kept walking, the town still days away, but the thought of a map, a rumor, or even a whispered direction tugged them onward. Somewhere ahead, in a place neither of them had seen, the other pieces of Esper's family waited, whether they knew it or not. By the time the sun had sunk behind the tree line, the air had cooled into the kind of stillness that made sound travel farther. Esper led them just far enough from the path to find a small clearing, sheltered by a pair of leaning birches. Moss carpeted the ground here, soft enough to rest on without pulling out their bedrolls. Daffodil set his small satchel down, shaking stray leaves from his fur. "You're sure we're far enough from the road?" Esper's ears flicked. "Yes. The wind's against it. Scent won't carry far. And we'll see anyone coming before they see us." She moved to the edge of the clearing, brushing her paw against the earth in that subtle, grounding way she did when she thought too long. Daffodil began arranging their dinner, 2 wrapped parcels of roasted root and dried berry paste that Willow had packed for them. "So, about earlier," he said, unwrapping one and sliding it toward her. "You've imagined your siblings, but what exactly have you pictured?" Esper sat, curling her tail inward like petals folding for the night. She hesitated before answering. "It has changed over the years. When I was little, I thought Storm would be loud and daring, and Starlight would be gentle. Sometimes I switched them in my mind. Sometimes I imagined all three of us would be exactly alike. She took a slow bite, chewing as she studied the dim tree line. Lately, I just wonder if they're happy. Daffodil looked down at his own food. You think about that a lot, huh? Every day since I left, she admitted, her tone calm but edged with something heavier. Aspen told me not to expect them to be the same as I imagined. Pokemon change. They grow different when they're apart. Maybe different doesn't mean worse, Daffodil said quietly. Esper's gaze softened at him. I hope you're right. They ate in the lull of nightfall, Lamise and Volbeat blinking between the moss and the birch roots. After a while, Daffodil stretched out on his side, plucking absently at the rose tuft on his tail. You know, he said, his voice trailing toward drowsiness, I keep thinking, if I'd been one of those eggs, I don't think I'd have left home unless someone came with me. Maybe they're like that too. Maybe they're just waiting for you to show up. Esper hummed low in her throat, the sound soft and thoughtful. Then I'll make sure I do. The wind shifted, bringing with it the faint scent of pine from somewhere ahead. Esper lay down, her eyes fixed on the stars pricking through the gaps in the leaves. Somewhere out there, beyond forests and towns, Storm and Starlight were under the same sky, close enough to imagine, far enough to feel like dreams. The stars were sharp tonight, cold pinpricks scattered across the velvet dark. Esper's gaze roamed without focus, letting the quiet seep into her. Daffodil's breathing had already slipped into the slow rhythm of sleep, the faint scent of roses lingering in the air around him. She blinked, slow and steady, when a shimmer, too deliberate to be starlight, moved across the upper reaches of the sky. It wasn't the dart of a shooting star, or the flutter of a passing cloud. This light curved, graceful, like the arc of a crescent moon come loose from its tether. Esper's chest gems caught a faint echo of it, a pulse of light so subtle she almost thought she imagined it. But then came the feeling, cool and serene, a presence brushing her mind the way a soft wind might pass over still water. Cresselia. The name wasn't spoken, but it lived in her thoughts, as if it had always been there. The arc of light in the sky wavered, like a ribbon catching moonlight, then vanished behind a bank of thin clouds. Yet Esper could still sense it, like the moment before a dream, where the edges of reality blur and anything feels possible. She didn't move, afraid to break the thread between them. Her breathing slowed, her mind quieted, until all she could hear was the faint rhythm of her heart and the distant sigh of wind in the grass. The presence seemed to linger, warm at its core, but wrapped in a halo of tranquil coolness, touching something deep in her. Hope, patience, and a strange, almost aching certainty that the path she'd chosen was the right one. Then, as gently as it had arrived, it receded. The cool air was just air again. The stars were just stars. Esper exhaled, her tail tips uncurling slightly. She turned her head to glance at Daffodil, still curled in sleep, his roses rising and falling with each breath. I'll find them, she whispered. Not to him, not even entirely to herself. Above, the sky remained still, but for a heartbeat, she could have sworn the faint arc of moonlight glimmered again, far to the north. The first threads of morning light were pale and cool, slipping through the canopy and catching on the dew scattered across the moss. A swallow called somewhere beyond the birches, its voice bright against the soft rustle of leaves. Esper stirred first. The cool breath of the night still lingered in the air, but the quiet was lighter now, less watchful, more expectant. She blinked slowly, reorienting herself to the shapes of the clearing, the faint warmth at her side where Daffodil slept. The memory of the night before still pressed gently against her mind. The arc of light, the tranquil presence, the feeling of being seen and guided. She let it sit there a moment before stretching her paws forward, claws sliding through the damp moss. Daffodil groaned softly as the movement stirred him. One eye cracked open, bright blue and unfocused. Morning already? His voice was thick with sleep, his tail giving a lazy flick. The sun doesn't wait for us, Esper replied, though her tone held no edge. He yawned hugely, ears tilting back. I could convince it to, if I asked nicely. A faint hum escaped her, not quite laughter, but close. Then we'd lose the good light for travel. Daffodil rolled onto his stomach and gave his rose tufts a quick shake, scattering a few damp petals onto the moss. Fine, but I'm not skipping breakfast. Wouldn't dream of it, she said, already unwrapping the last of the roasted roots Willow had packed. The scent of them mixed with the crisp morning air, earthy and grounding. They ate in companionable quiet, the world waking up around them. Buzzing bug types, distant water, the whisper of wind across leaves. Esper's eyes kept drifting north without meaning to, toward where she thought she'd seen that final glimmer of Cresselia. When they were ready to leave, Daffodil shouldered his satchel and glanced toward the path. You've got that look. What look? The one that says you've already decided something before I've even had my tea. His voice was teasing, but his gaze was curious. Esper only flicked her tail tips and started forward. We're going to make good time today. He fell into step beside her, muttering something about stubborn psychic types, but there was no heat in it. The sun was climbing now, gold spilling over the grass as they left the clearing behind. Esper kept her eyes forward, but the memory of the night's presence stayed close, quiet and steady, a light she could follow. The road narrowed for a time, curling between rolling meadow slopes before dipping into a stretch of thin woodland. The air was warmer now, the sharp scent of pine drifting in from somewhere ahead. They kept a steady pace, stopping only once to drink from a creek that tumbled down a stony embankment. By mid-afternoon, the forest had given way again, the ground leveled, the trees thinning, and a neat rows of orchard-like growth. Beyond them, the shape of rooftops appeared, some sloped and tiled, others thatched in golden straw, clustered around a tall stone clock tower that seemed faintly to gleam in the sunlight. That's gotta be it, Daffodil said, his pace picking up. Aspen said the town had a tower, right? Esper nodded once, but her eyes were scanning more than the view, watching the way light glanced off distant windows, catching the faint pull in her chest as if the presence from the night before still tugged at her steps. The road widened into a packed dirt lane, bordered by weathered wooden fences. Farmers with baskets of early harvest passed by, nodding in greeting. The smell of baking bread drifted from somewhere close, making Daffodil's ears perk. The first cluster of buildings rose around them. A smithy, a tidy general store, a scattering of small homes. The streets were lively, but not crowded. A few Pokemon lounged in the shade of awnings, trading news in low voices. Daffodil slowed beside her. Where do we even start? Just walk up to someone and say, Hello, we're looking for mysterious far-off places. Esper's tail tips curled slightly. We listen first. Pokemon speak more freely when they're not speaking to you. They drifted toward a small plaza near the tower, where a fountain trickled steadily and a handful of market stalls stood open. Esper lingered near a booth selling dried herbs, pretending to study the bundles while her ears caught fragments of conversation from nearby. Fog never lifts. Dangerous to travel without a guide. Heard the plains are blooming early this year. She exchanged a quiet glance with Daffodil, who had caught the same words. His roses twitched with interest. That's them, isn't it? The basin and the plains. Esper gave the faintest nod. Close enough to follow. They drifted to a shaded bench on the plaza's edge, keeping their voices low. If we split up for a bit, we can hear more, Daffodil suggested. Stay in sight, Esper said firmly. Then, after a pause, and listen for anything about guides. The basin won't welcome strangers. Daffodil gave a little grin. Guess it's time to act casual. They rose, each taking a different path through the plaza, the afternoon light slanting gold between the buildings. Somewhere in the mingled conversations and footsteps, Esper felt the faint, steady certainty from the night before, an unseen thread weaving through the noise, leading her forward. Esper moved with the slow, unhurried steps of someone browsing without intent, letting her gaze skim the baskets of fresh fruit and jars of wildflower honey at one stall, the woven charms and trinkets at another. Her ears, however, were tuned not to the sellers, but to the ebb and flow of passing voices. Most of it was idle talk, weather, crop prices, a recent festival. But then she caught a pair of lower tones just beyond a row of stacked crates. She shifted her weight, appearing to study a string of dried berries while the voices came into focus. 3 days late coming back from the basin route, one voice muttered, rough and a little wary. Should have known better than to take it without Torin, the other replied. Fog's thick enough to hide the ground under your paws this time of year. Course they got turned around. Esper's chest gems gave a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer. She angled herself slightly, keeping them in sight without drawing notice. The first speaker was a sturdy golem with dust still clinging to the edges of his shell. The second, a lithe knockdowl whose feathers carried the faint smell of rain. Torn's the only one who can walk in without a map, the golem was saying. Knows the spirits there, or so they say. Folks will tell you it's luck, but I've seen him take a straight path where others wander for days. The knockdowl huffed. You won't find him in the open. Only comes in for supplies when he feels like it. Esper filed the name away, quiet as a pressed leaf in her mind. Torin. She stepped back from the stall, the voices fading behind her. Daffodil strolled away from the bench with the easy gait of someone trying very hard not to look like they were trying. His roses swayed lightly with each step, the scent of their petals mingling with the smell of baking bread and sun-warmed wood. He let himself drift toward the smell, of course, toward the smell, and found a cart stacked high with crusty rolls and braided loaves. The cart's owner, a cheerful Breloom, with flour dusting her cap, was deep in conversation with two travelers on the far side. Plains are the place to be this month, one of the travelers, a Meowstick, was saying as he leaned an elbow on the cart. Flowers are already in full bloom, and they're saying the fairy lights are brighter than usual. The other, a Lopunny with travel-worn paws, chuckled. And the plainsfolk will tell you it means luck. Harvest will be good. Or that the lights are watching over them. Daffodil tilted his ears forward without turning his head, pretending to inspect a neat row of rolls. Trouble is, the Meowstick continued, lowering his voice slightly, visitors tend to get distracted. Easy to lose track of time out there. What with the lights and all. They'll keep you until you forget you meant to leave. That's why you go with someone local, the Law Bunny replied. They'll keep you walking instead of wandering. Ask for Lark. She runs a little tea house on the western edge, knows when to stop looking and start moving. Daffodil plucked out a small roll from the display, dropping a few coins into the Breloom's outstretched paw with a polite nod. Thanks, he murmured, though he wasn't entirely talking about the bread. He wandered a few steps away, biting into the roll, soft, faintly sweet, and spotted Esper moving toward him. Her walk had that deliberate, quiet precision that meant she'd found something. Find something? He asked as he stopped beside her. A name, she said softly. Torin. A guide for the basin. Daffodil swallowed his mouthful. Funny, he murmured, lowering his voice. I've got a name too. Lark. Knows the Fairylight Plains. Esper's eyes met his, a subtle spark of interest there. Guess we're already doing better than wandering in blind, he said with a small smile, brushing a crumb from his muzzle. Her tail tips curled faintly. Now we just have to decide which path comes first. They lingered there in the square, the hum of the market around them, each holding a new thread to follow, north into the basin's fog, or east toward the plains and their lights. Somewhere, the road ahead was already taking shape. The general store was quiet when they stepped inside, the wooden floorboards creaking softly under paw. The air smelled faintly of dried herbs, parchment, and oil for lanterns. Behind the counter, an elderly ferret glanced up at them from sorting a bundle of twine. Travelers, are you? He said, voice warm but a little gravelly. Esper gave a small nod. We're looking for a detailed map of the region, one that marks the fog-shrouded basin and the Fairylight Plains. The ferret's whiskers twitched. Far places to be asking about from this little town. He bent down, rummaging beneath the counter, and came up with a rolled parchment bound in twine. Here's the largest I've got. Covers from here all the way past the coastal ranges. He spread it across the counter, smoothing the corners flat. Ink lines wound like rivers across the parchment, dotted with tiny hand-lettered names. Daffodil leaned closer. How far to the basin from here? On foot? The ferret traced a claw northwest. 3 months. If you follow the safe roads and keep your pace steady. Quicker if you cut through the wild ground. But the fog swallows the unprepared. You'd best have a guide if you plan to cross. Esper studied the twisting paths, committing the landmarks to memory. And the plains? The ferret's paw moved northeast. 5 months, give or take. Long road. And not much in the way of shelter, unless you know where to look. Most folks stop in the border settlements first. Daffodil gave a low whistle. We've only been walking a handful of days, and already it's months ahead either way. That's the way of the world, son, the ferret said with a wry smile. Every long road starts short. I can sell you this map for 8 coins. It's marked with the safer rest stops, too. Esper slid the coins across without hesitation. We'll take it. Back outside, they found a shaded bench near the fountain. Esper unrolled the map again, her tail tips curling slightly as she traced the 2 distant routes. Months apart, Daffodil murmured, leaning on his paws. And we've got 2 leads, one for each place. Which one do we follow first? Esper's eyes lingered northward, before returning to the parchment. We decide after we've asked a few more questions. The roads are long. We'll only get one chance to take them in the right order. The plaza had thinned since they had arrived. A few stalls were closing for the day, their owners packing goods into crates, while the shadows from the clock tower stretched long across the cobblestones. Esper rolled the map back up and slid it into her satchel. We'll start with the inn, she said quietly. Travelers pass through there. Someone may have news about the roads, or about Torin or Lark. Daffodil's ears tipped forward. And if we're lucky, someone might have even seen them. The inn sat just off the square, its sign a carved wooden crescent moon, swinging gently in the breeze. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of stewed vegetables and hearth smoke. A few tables were occupied by weary-looking merchants, a pair of younger Pokemon playing cards in the corner, and a lone Pidgeotto perched on the back of a chair near the window. They chose a table near the far wall, where they could see the door in most of the room. A Sylveon with a neat braid of ribbon approached, setting down 2 cups of water without being asked. "Passing through?" she asked with an easy smile. "Looking for information," Esper said, keeping her tone polite. "About the northern and eastern roads. Conditions, travel times, and whether anyone's seen a guide named Torin, or a plainsfolk called Lark." The Sylveon tilted her head thoughtfully. "Torin. Name's familiar. You'll want the Basin Road for that one. Heard he's been spotted closer to the marshes lately, but never stays in one place long. And Lark? She runs a little tea house just inside the plains. Popular with traders, though she doesn't leave her spot often." Daffodil leaned forward. "Any news on the roads themselves?" "North to the basin's drier than usual, but the fog hasn't let up. Might make better time through the foothills if you don't mind rougher ground. East to the plains is open, but the ridge path's been getting heavy rain. Safer to take the river road, though it's longer." Esper dipped her head in thanks. "That's helpful." When the Sylveon moved on to another table, Daffodil leaned in. "Sounds like the basin's closer, but harder to approach without Torin. The plains are farther, but we already know exactly where to find Lark if we can reach her." Esper's gaze dropped to the table for a moment, her tail tips curling in thought. "One will test our endurance, the other will test our luck." Daffodil's roses gave a faint twitch. "And which one are you feeling pulled toward?" Her eyes lifted toward the north-facing window, where the fading light was paling into early twilight. "The one that won't wait for us forever." The parchment rustled softly in the breeze, and for just a moment, Esper thought she felt that same quiet pull she'd sensed in the night, cool and sure, pointing north. Esper sat in silence for a few breaths, letting the hum of the room wash over her. The map in her mind, the names they'd learned, the threads pulling in opposite directions. It all settled into one clear path. "We'll look for Torin," she said at last, voice steady but quiet. "If the basin's closer, it makes sense to find him before he moves on." Daffodil gave a small nod. "All right. We'll have to ask around at first light then." Esper's gaze drifted back to the Sylveon at the counter, who was chatting amiably with the Pidgeotto. After a moment's thought, she rose and padded toward her. The Sylveon glanced up as she approached. "Need something else?" "Perhaps," Esper said evenly. "Have there been any sightings of Cresselia in the area? Or stories told of her?" The Sylveon's ribbon stilled for a heartbeat, her expression shifting to something softer. "Cresselia. Now there's a name you don't hear every day." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a storyteller's tone. "Old folk around here say she watches the roads on nights when the sky is clear enough to drink from. They believe the moon's light carries threads, silken and unseen, that bind those meant to be reunited." Esper's eyes sharpened faintly. "Reunited?" "Aye," the Sylveon continued. "Doesn't matter if they've never met, or if they've been apart for years. If the bond is strong enough, Cresselia's moon ties their paths together. They say you'll know it when you look up and feel the moon looking back. Like it's not just shining on you, but reaching for someone else, too." Her voice lowered further, almost conspirational. "Course, the tricky part is, You never know when or where you'll meet. Could be tomorrow, could be seasons from now. But if Chrysalia's threads have you, the road will bend to make it happen. Esper felt the words sink into her, quiet but sure, like the cool brush of last night's presence across her thoughts. Thank you, she said softly, dipping her head. As she returned to the table, Daffodil's curious glance met her own. What was that about? Just a story, Esper murmured, sitting down again. One worth remembering. Outside, the evening light deepened, the first star pricking through the indigo sky. Somewhere, far to the north, a road wound toward the fog, and toward a guide who might hold the first key to her siblings.